Hey, welcome to a new episode of SDV Coffee Talk. Today again with two amazing guests, Florian, you probably all know, and Partha. He was also a guest in one of the episodes. Just a small disclaimer from my side. Everything what I say is my own opinion and has nothing to do with my employer. Today we will talk about SDV and AI. I think Florian and Partha were on a conference recently, and we will talk about their takeaways. Probably we should have a short introduction. Probably not everybody knows you. Partha, do you want to start?
Absolutely. So again, Fatih, thank you so much for inviting to this forum. I have been here before. We always had great discussions on what's happening in the industry at this moment. So as for myself, for those who do not know me, I'm Partha Goswami, ex-General Motors. For the last 2 years, I have been on my own independent consultant, advisor, speaker, writer, everything. I stay understanding that technology trends in the industry is really my passion. And out of that, the softwareization of the industry is something that I follow with particular interest. And it's really that particular interest that took me to this conference 2 weeks back. And we talked a great deal about what's happening. And some of the takeaways I think are worth discussing with all of you. So looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks.
Hey,
Florian?
yeah. So yeah, I've been a regular, I guess, on this show, but yeah, in a very short nutshell, I've been in the automotive industry for 20 years, 8 years in the traditional environment, 6 years at Tesla, 1 year at NEO, and now similar like Partha, in consultant for the last 6 years, everything around SDV, architecture, mindset, strategy, etc., etc. And running into this gentleman every year in the beautiful Ann Arbor at the SDV USA conference, and there's a lot of stuff going on. So starting from, as we just said in the pre-talk, maybe just starting from removing that term from our vocabulary, right? Because SDVs is a buzzword that is a lot used overly broadly and a lot, and we in the industry almost agree is like, it's just every car is an SDV from here on forward, else you have some problem selling it anyway. But as Fatih, as you brought up really nicely, it's like, as a customer, I don't care. Actually, I don't know what an SDV is, right? So we talk as the engineering nerds, we talk about that term a lot and so on. But as we just chatted in the pre-talk, like, I mean, go out to the streets and ask people, what is an SDV? It's like, I don't know. I mean, maybe a radio station or something like this. I don't know.
Probably. Probably.
Absolutely. And I want to, before I start, I'd like to say one more thing. Fatih and I had some additional collaboration we did last year on a particular report where it basically focused on essentially the challenges of SDV. At the time when everybody was talking SDV all over the place as the next best thing in the world, we really looked at, okay, that's cool, but these are really the things we need to work on. And a lot of those things I now see being discussed. So I feel pretty good about the work we did, Fatih.
Yeah, it was a great collaboration, actually. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yes.
Probably we can just start with your impressions from the conference. I mean, what kind of things you have seen there, and what were hot topics discussed by everybody? Probably you can just share your impressions.
Right.
And we can continue.
Absolutely. I'll give a very quick summary in a quick overview, 10,000 feet view, and then we can start from there. But I'll start from what Florian started to say, that the term is everywhere. It's a buzzword and consumers don't really care. And as I was mentioning in our pre-call chat, that years back when connectivity, telematics were the coolest thing in the auto industry and everybody is trying to build those capability, the term connected car was very popular. And connectivity was the term used in many different conferences, connectivity, USA 20, whatever, right? The thing at the time, I remember having this discussion and mentioning to somebody that, do we call our homes like a plumbed home or an electrified house? We don't call them because we assume that underlying capability is all there. Now, I understand at some point, initially, it's okay to call connected car, but eventually, given that it's a basic enabler, underlying enabler, we won't and probably are not calling that using the term connected car anymore. I think SDV, we should see that in the same light, that today the term itself is everywhere. But honestly, as you mentioned, and that's something we discussed in the conference as well, do consumers really care, what kind of, is it a zonal architecture or what's the, HPC like, how many teraflops, etc. Ultimately, it really matters what is it delivering. So it's okay to talk about all these little nuances of the technology underlying architecture itself, but I think going forward, more and more, we have to focus more on, so what does it give it to the users? And I think that should be our core focus. Of course, there are many challenges which we are going to talk about, things that we discussed at the conference as well, but that's the kind of foundation from which I'd like to start.
I love this comparison, because in the very beginning, they called that houses with plumbing, right? So that was a sales aspect, right? But at one point, exactly as what we look at automotive, I remember back in the day, cars were advertised, they have AC, right? I mean, if you look at the advertising of cars, nobody's advertising cars with air conditioning, right? That's just like implied. A car has air conditioning, it has central locking, it has all those things, right? And it's the same thing as Partha used to say about the housing. And at one point, it's just like the SDV approach and architecture is just how cars are from this point on forward. And to be fair, marketing doesn't even use that term, right? So you don't see commercials in TV or whatever, and they say like, here's the newest SDV or something like this. This is just something we use from the inside to discuss our architectural generations and stuff like this. And Fatih, you are muted.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that you actually moderated this short talks in the conference. What kind of topics were there actually in this short? I think some
all over. And actually, that's one thing I liked about this event, that we talked about not just the what is commonly understood as architectural aspects of SDV. We did talk about that, of course, but mainly we talked about other, like a surrounding themes around it. Okay, of course, like open source software, we all talk about it, right? So we talked about busting some of the myths there and what's lacking and where things are. We talked about cybersecurity and the critical state of cyber, where we are. We don't talk enough about it. Occasionally we see that, oh, there is one more incident, but some of the presenters, they really brought out some of those numbers are shocking. And so that's kind of another thing we talked about. Of course, AI, the intersection of SDV and AI, okay, and how both of them are enablers, that they need to kind of, again, we need to focus on what they can do to the overall final experience, as well as the product development of the vehicle. So those are some of the topics we talked about. We also talked about this new marketplace that came out in the US, SDVerse. We can talk a little bit more about that, and how that can be a kind of complement, not an alternative, but more of a complement to this idea of open source, and why we need the open source, as opposed to everybody using their own proprietary software, how that can really help the cause of softwareization by the traditional car makers.
So it's great. I had the top 3 points were exactly the same for me.
Awesome.
Open source, and we should actually spend a little bit of time talking about that, because I see a shift focusing much more on open source, and on the other side you also see more open source engagement communities and stuff like this.
Yep.
AI, well, it was this conference had a co-located track which was AI in automotive, which was like super interesting. I think for AI in automotive, it's very important that we draw lines, that we say like it's not only one like Skynet AI that does everything, but you have like AI in generative AI, you have edge AI, you have all this kind of different things. So we should talk about that a little bit. And then cybersecurity went up a lot in the importance in this event, and not only in this event, in general. I see much more effort in cybersecurity, much more talk about cybersecurity. I personally don't think that we are secure yet. I think there's in the very early stages, but yeah, those are definitely the top 3 topics. One term I heard more and more, or more often there, I love, because I haven't heard it in 20 years, is defragmentation. And this was, you remember back in the day, you had to do defragmentation on your hard drive in Windows 95.
Yeah, yeah.
It was like the blocks flying around, and in the end, magically everything was like fantastic, even though you don't feel any difference.
Yeah.
No, but the term is now used in automotive, and what it basically means is like, hey, get away from this idea that you have, you know, separated solutions for certain features or functionalities, and get into this idea of defragmentation. Bring it more together and have your architecture actually work as a whole to provide a feature set to the user who doesn't care if it's an EE architecture or not. That's for sure. So yeah, in sum, those are the top 3 topics, and I'm happy to just like, you know, spend a couple of minutes on each of them.
Yeah, and I would say not the, you know, beyond the, you know, this core central topics. Another thing I heard, you know, and Florian, you did too, is the idea that it's not necessarily just the technology, you know, that is kind of not a showstopper, but somewhat of a roadblock to, at least for the traditional car companies. And what we mean by that is organizational changes is extremely important. You know, organizational change at multiple levels, how we develop the car, what's the product development process, what's our, how CI/CD approach is changing the basic fundamental vehicle development and all the validation that goes with it, and why that's so much important to do all those things without compromising safety. And the second level of the same issue is about supply chain interaction, right? Because and I talk about it all the time, and I'm glad to see that, you know, I heard more echoes of the same, that traditional car industry is like a pyramid when it comes to supply chain. You know, the car industry, the OEM sits at the top, and then the tier 1 is the next one, and then the tier 2, tier 3, etc. All of you guys know about that. Right now, that is kind of breaking down. The roles are changing. Car companies want to be more in charge in terms of controlling, being more vertically integrated. But then it's one thing to say, I will control everything and I'll be vertically integrated. Another thing to say, I have the capability to do so. Okay. In most cases, we see that car companies started with, you know, that particular approach. They said, we'll do everything. We'll build our software factory, let's say. You know, we all know about the, you know, the progression of how CARIAD started, and then, you know, changes they had to go through, and then finally they, you know, had some partnerships with younger car companies such as Rivian, such as Xiaopeng, and then they, right now we'll see how that goes, right? But this whole idea that I have to now I want to control everything as an OEM, but at the same time I have to be mindful of the partnership that I need to get there, because I cannot do everything no matter how large and resourceful I am. So that something came about multiple times in multiple conversations, and somebody said the OEMs and tier 1s, they should leave their egos behind and really kind of open up to figure out what's the best collaboration model. Go ahead.
It was an OEM who said that. That was the best part of the show for me. Was
really?
Actually, it was an OEM. I don't say which one, but it was
an
OEM who actually stated that, and everybody was almost cheering. So,
oh wow, okay,
yeah.
Oh, this is okay.
Absolutely. So, yeah, just to tag on to this sort of one thing from the pyramid point of view. Suddenly, we also see the traditional structures changing a little bit. So originally, as Partha said, you had like OEM, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Now we're seeing tier 3s talking to OEMs. So you see chip manufacturers, which are traditional tier 3s like Qualcomm or Nvidia, suddenly being in the boat, and which is great. To instead of having a hierarchy, should actually have a collaboration, and that is actually where the OEM, I mean everybody, but also a member of an OEM says, no, we should actually, as an OEM, should stop being like, you know, like snobbish on top, basically, right, and work closer together. That's for sure.
Okay. I have one question actually. I mean, in the last VIA developers conference in Berlin, I mean, in summer, where I attended, the biggest topic was agentic AI. You know, everything is agentic. I mean, generative AI is already old, and now agentic AI, everything with the agents, and you can do programming much easier. I'm using it a lot actually, also in my private programming project. Were there anything regarding agentic AI in this conference with SDV in combination? I mean, I imagine if an agent, for example, would run in a vehicle in an SDV, you know, and you can say something to the AI and it will do in the car something, you know.
So
it
so
could
you
be
have
safety issue, you know. I mean,
so you have different levels of AI. That's what I mentioned earlier. So Gen AI is basically almost yesterday, right? So everybody knows Gen AI is like your ChatGPT, whatever.
exactly.
You have natural voice recognition. That's basically the same. It generates you something in voice. Agentic AI is currently on the forefront of doing like cleaning up requirements, doing all this kind of stuff, going through, and you give an agent a task. You actually you attach RAG to it, so retrieval augmented generation, and then that agent can go out and find stuff and so on. This is where we are today. This is the state of the art. Edge AI, that's tomorrow. So an agent to actually run actively on the car is not yet what we are seeing, at least not what I'm seeing. I see agents running on servers, agents running in R&D centers, and so on. Edge AI is something, and for those who are not familiar with the term, that means it's actually running on the vehicle, right, instead of in the cloud somewhere. That has challenges, right? It's power consumption. I mean, I don't want my Edge AI consume more energy than my drivetrain, right? So, I mean, it's not as extreme, but in the end, AI consumes a lot of power. So this is something that we will see, but they are going to work on it. They also have to work on the technology, on the chips being less power consuming, on their algorithms being less power consuming. So what we also see is the discussion. Everybody heard the term like LLM, so large language module. That was also last. Suddenly people started talking about SLMs, so small language modules. So language modules here specifically prepare and train for a certain task. So an LLM is basically trained with the knowledge of mankind and the entire internet, and that makes it gigantic and also hallucinating a lot. Now we are actually trimming that down and say we don't want my AI in the car speak fluent Chinese. I don't need that, right? I just wanted to understand like driving scenarios and so on. So we're trimming down a lot of the fat, and that's what we then see when we get into SLM. So that's one of the hot topics this year.
I mean,
right.
No,
I was going to echo that. And again, I'm not an expert on AI, so I won't go into the nuances of agentic AI. But certainly, going back to what Florian just said, that there were a lot of talk about that we really need to move more towards edge, meaning onboard in the car computation. But that again brings up the issue of my AI algorithm has to be much more light in terms of resource usage, in terms of energy usage, so that it requires a whole brand new, development basically, so that we are not necessarily replicating something which is based on the cloud model. So that requires some additional work. We are certainly not there yet. And some of the application that we see, big application that we see, for example, Tesla and now other car companies are doing that too, training their let's say autonomous capability, ADAS capability based on all this visual data we're capturing. A lot of that is actually happening in the cloud, which is fine. But then when you are trying to do things for more consumer-oriented application, for more in-vehicle applications, I think there is a big need for edge AI for automotive.
Before we get to Samet's question, real quick, so it's important, and I think a lot of people who are watching this understand that already, but outside of our world, not. People believe AI in cars right now means they put software in a car that continuously learns out of the environment and so on. And I happen to talk to a lot of people also in our industry. It's like, no, training AIs is different than giving AI parameter and information. This is the RAG stuff, and I give customizations, but training is very different. Training happens on large servers and somewhere in large server centers and with a lot of data. So the fact that it's a fact that whatever AI we have in the car right now, there's no evolution in the car. The evolution happens on the server and in the training centers, which is great, because on the validation side of things, we haven't figured out how would we even validate a car that continuously evolves forward, right? That's probably a topic for a completely different talk, but just to park that statement. Okay, so Samet says AI-defined vehicles.
I mean,
we just talked about that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but I wanted to also refer to one point we talked before the talk. We in the pre-meeting. You told that we are still so focused on vehicles or our cars, you know. And I mean, this is getting in the same direction. I mean, now we have software-defined vehicles. Probably the next level is AI-defined vehicles. Should we really focus on vehicles at all? I mean,
no, we have to focus
because
on mobility, right? So that's the thing. And eventually user experience. So yes, first I agree with, or we kind of agree with Summit. It's like SDV is basically that's already the thing, right? So AI defined is tomorrow, but we don't really want to start a term ADV or AIDV or whatever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I just saw today a great post on LinkedIn. It's like in China, they don't even sell cars anymore. They don't use that term anymore, right? So we're selling mobility and mobility experience. And this is very important. There are different tastes or styles of it, right? So you can have human-driven mobility, you can have automated mobility, you can have recreational mobility, all this kind of stuff, for sure, right? But in the end, it's not only about making a mechanical product that we used to know as cars.
Yeah, and I think it's important that a lot of those terms is a byproduct of our notion of what car was in the past. You know, like a sheet metal hardware centric product.
Engine
But
driven.
and you mentioned China, and I think there is a very good reason why we see how Chinese consumers look at the cars differently than we see in US or Europe. And part of the reason being, we talk about the idea of digital natives, the kids, a lot of our children who are born in, with, iPads and iPhones in their hand, right? So they grew up in that notion. They see that those things are taken for granted. They are not novelty, but they are, what's available today, right? So I think China is a country, I call them, they are the digital natives in that sense, because the entire car industry came of age literally at the same time as all those digital consumer devices came to the market, right? So as a result, they don't have that legacy perception of car. And I'm not saying right or wrong, okay? It's just saying as a historical fact, they don't have that legacy mindset of how they see the cars of the previous decades, and they start seeing car as another device that they are beginning to get and use. As a result, the focus is often on smart car, intelligent car, that kind of term, number one, and then going beyond just seeing car as an entity, but kind of something like a smart mobility as the bigger expression to kind of adjust our notion, our perception of what we thought before and what the new generation consumers, including consumers in China, they are thinking about it. So I think that change in mindset is very important. Folks like us, we have been there on that side, and we are in this side of the transition to the digital world. So for us, we see both of those. But then for some markets, emerging markets, emerging technology markets such as China, they are firmly rooted in that, the digital era. So as a result, their perception is different, and we should be very mindful of that as well.
And history repeats itself a little bit, right? So we are all rooted in the EE architecture, but there was an architecture before that as well, right? And there was a similar change that at one point all the mechanics in the car got amended by electronics, right? And this is where we are at home, right? So we are thinking it was like microcontrollers and getting features into the microcontroller and so on. But there was a generation before us that actually was using a screwdriver, listening to the engine. I don't know if you remember those guys, and then they adjusted the carburetors and stuff like this, right? Yeah. So this has happened before. And then the last time we went from a mechanical to EE architecture, we saw the players from Japan and Korea joining the game. Not urgently their customers too much. And this is where Partha has a very good point. And as was actually part of my presentation at the event, the Chinese customers also more demanding when it comes to digitalization or digitization, whatever the right word is, of the mobility, right? And I use this example, and I used it in this talk here before, is like, in America, one of the largest innovations over the last 5 years was the multifunction lift gate for a pickup truck, period, right? And while in China, the people are so much more after like full integration with their completely digital ecosystem, and to get that over into their cars. You see in other countries, they just like put bigger screens in, right? And that is not actually what we're talking about here. So it's both, right? It's the companies and the engineering mindset, but you also have to serve your market. That's a little the tricky part. So it wouldn't help if from one moment to the other, every car would be like fully equipped SDV in the US, then they would not sell.
But I think there is one important point you mentioned, I think, a couple of minutes before. I mean, that the customer actually looks on the experience, not on the hardware, not on if this is an SDV or AI driven or whatever. The full package counts, so to say. I mean, the customer pays for the full package. Actually, probably tomorrow something else will come, and the experience will change, and then the customer will pay for that, and not because a certain technology. I think nowadays we have this problem with SDVs and AIs that we are also too much focused on the technology. We say, okay, AI, agentic AI, Gen AI, SDV. This is probably too much focused on the technology. I mean, I think probably OEMs should more concentrate on the experience, customer experience, that they give, I don't know, fully integrated, in an ecosystem integrated thing. That it works out of the dock with your smartphone, with your I don't know, backend services you use usually or whatever, or with your environment. I mean, that it perceives the environment and also sort of sensors and also react to this.
So an interesting word you just use is that it works with your smartphone and so on. And
exactly.
I think currently this is the thing. Currently, I think most of the customers, their first priority is it has to work. I don't want to get overloaded with gizmos and gimmicks that don't work, right?
Yes.
So actually has to work, and then we can add to it. So it has to have the foundation that works. And this is something, I mean, at Tesla back in the day, we did that a lot. We built on an existing foundation, and once we had that under control, which took a while, we could actually add features much more easily. And car makers actually have to focus on the foundation and then build on it, but it has to work.
Yeah. And there are actually, we can, kind of peel it off at multiple levels. Let's start with the experience, right? And what I feel, not even before we are trying to make this change to software first architecture, even before that, over the last 10, 15, 20 years, car industries have continuously added technology, right? You need ADAS, you need another ADAS feature, you need add another ECU, in a kind of going back to that defragmentation term. In a fragmented way, we had all these ECUs, right? So what happened was, I think, and I talk about it, that cars, the cockpit, which is the area which is the main interface with the consumer, that has become like a kitchen sink. Like in our kitchen, we kind of throw everything, before it goes to the dishwasher, right? You keep adding stuff. So you're adding features, and to a point that today, a lot of surveys that we see, at least in the US market, and I'm sure it's probably similar in Europe, a large percentage of the consumers, they may not even know what features the car come with. They may never use it in their life.
Probably, yes, probably.
And even if they know what the feature is, they may have a hard time finding it, because it may be just lying 3 menu layers deep, right?
Yep.
So there is, as we are kind of becoming more softwareized, and we talk about this decoupling hardware from software, and we are kind of creating this middleware, then we have this application at the top. Well, we can fall into the same trap, because we can add very many new applications, right? The thing is, at the end of the day, it's really, if we go back and really focus on the word experience, it has to be a simplified experience. Because one thing, I want to go back to the basics, okay? First principle, that the way we drive the car, and as long as people are driving, okay, autonomous, fully autonomous, that's a separate discussion. But as long as we are driving, we have to remember that the average driver is not a trained airplane pilot, okay? He or she is it's like an iPhone user, right? I mean, it just has to work. I get into the car and start working on it. So as a result, the the interface should be closer to that iPhone principle. I'm not saying smartphone, okay? I don't want to bring smartphone into the discussion, but this idea that it just works, from get-go in a very simplified fashion with minimum interface complexities. I think it was an issue 10 years back. With vehicles becoming a lot more softwareized, that issue is not going to go away, and every car maker need to focus on that, because consumer will still suffer from overload of features and functionality if we don't do this right.
Yeah, and one of the great examples I like to use here is when we came out with the Tesla Model 3, there's this lid that closes the center console, and people tended to close it too harsh, and it popped back open. And we realized that ourselves, and then we put in a very small piece of software that just looks at the light, and if the light flickers 3 times within 2 seconds, it's very likely that somebody tries to close the lid. And the software then get forward and proactively said, hey, and there was a little video. If you want to close it, just close it this way gently, and it will not open again. And then that bugged me again. So what I want to say with that is, first of all, we will, from here on forward, we will always have more functionality in a car than the individual will use. You will not have all your functionality used by everybody. Back in the day, it was different, right? So you put a clutch in the car, everybody who's using the car will use the clutch. So you put features in the car today, they will not be used by everybody, but they have to be self-explanatory to an extent. And then the next step, and I think AI will help us with that in 5 years, within the next 5 years, some smart chip in the car. There's like, hey, Partha, I think you'd like to show the karaoke screen. You're like digging for 5 minutes and singing. Maybe you want to do this. And for heaven's sake, please don't use pop-ups like Google does. It's terrible the way they try to educate us with new features and Confluence and everything. It's absolutely a disaster. I want to do something, and I have to click away 12 pop-ups about the next new feature. I don't want that. Software in the car should be able to understand, based on my actions, what kind of information and what kind of training I want, and then give it to me only in that amount I need. I really think that natural language discussion, AI and so on can really help with that. And also, for heaven's sake, get all the other language models out of the car. They're just like terrible.
Yeah. And my experience is, I have spent a lot of time as a technology analyst, technology advisor, whatever, strategist with a lot of HMI experts, in my ex-employer. And I would say, historically, the car as a product, as a cockpit, as an experience, was very much an output of an engineer. Okay, and we kept talking about it should be customer centric, it should be all that stuff, and you do all this market research and bring the input. Ultimately, that doesn't happen. So my point is, as vehicles become more sophisticated, become more software driven, there's an opportunity to really make it completely, truly customer centric. And again, going back to what Florian said, we obviously don't want them to be limited to only 2 or 3 functions. We wanted to give them the benefit of all the wonderful possibilities that technology can bring, but still keeping in mind that they are not wizards, trained wizards like airplane pilots, that they can kind of really look at all these 10,000 features and use them to their advantage. We still need to figure out what that is. And really, that the role of consumer should be like front and center when you are developing it. It should not be an engineer's car. And it sounds very basic, but I think at this era we need to really live up to it. That hasn't happened, and I'm just trying to I open it up, saying that, hey, we really need to be consumer centric. And I'm saying from a perspective of my me as a customer, because if I can figure things out, and I live and breathe what's happening in the latest in the car world, if I can do that sometimes, I can imagine what somebody else, what kind of hardship they can have. So if I'm not having that full benefit of the full experience, then all this technology development is not being done right.
So the thing is that we, of course, we have the engineering glasses on, and we can't really get rid of them completely. So when there's some feature or functionality in my car that doesn't work as I expected, as an engineer, I naturally dig in and I see, did I do something wrong? Did the car do something wrong? Did I maybe have the wrong preconditions? But this is us. You have to think about the world outside of engineering. I always like, and I mentioned that before, what would my mom do, right? You know what my mom would do? She wouldn't question any of these things. She would just never, ever touch that feature again, ever. Right? If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So I don't care then for it. So we have to keep that in mind, that our natural customer, 98% of them are not engineers, or maybe 90%. I don't know the number, but cars are getting more and more complex, and we really have to really put a lot of effort in that the front end, the user interface, and not only the graphical user interface, the general user interface, stays as simple as possible.
This is one of the points which disturbs me a lot in the current approach. If I look on the cars on the market, they are full of displays. I mean, this is understood. I mean, SDV or these modern cars are just like only displays. You know, this is very disturbing.
Unfortunately, we are not done yet. There will be more.
I think the problem is that displays don't make a car smart
or safe.
You're just or safe. But in my opinion, the car or the vehicle should be more context sensitive. You know, that the car understands the environment, the driver, what happens in the car, outside the car, and reacts accordingly. You know, but this is not there at all. It's still the cars to nowadays are stupid devices. You know, they just they don't really interpret what's coming from the sensors and from inside cameras, outside cameras. This is not really the vehicle itself is not context sensitive, and I think this is the next big step, in my opinion. A vehicle should be context sensitive.
But the thing is, there is no the vehicle from that point of view, right? It's still a conglomerate of different things that do different stuff in the car. So I think the very first step is the car makers have to define who is the boss in the car, who is actually leading those efforts, because you have sensors, you have information, you have outside information, you have music playing, you have all this kind of stuff. So who is bringing that together? And that's a very, very interesting question, right? So at Tesla, for example, it was the center display vehicle gateway unit that had the control over everything it had to say. We took information from the exterior sensors, we took information from the interior sensors, and we created a virtual situation and say, okay, this is the situation the driver is in right now, and this is what we can suggest or what we can offer. And this is exactly what has to happen now. Edge AI will definitely help with that.
Yes, definitely.
And I can't wait for that, because I think the step between now and until Edge AI will help with that will be painful. It will be just annoying because it will only be half-baked.
Yeah, I want to add something more to this overall consumer experience. I want to expand it to the idea of ownership experience, and I want to add the idea that the idea of the notion of affordability. And this came up not necessarily as a theme, but it came up in several questions in some of our conversation and panels. The thing is, as we are developing these softwares, we also have to figure out how does this make the car cheaper and more affordable. Okay, today, at least in the United States market, our average transaction price of a vehicle, and many of them are electrified vehicles, so they have a lot more different technologies, batteries, etc. But taking those discussions out, basically the ATP, or the average transaction price of a vehicle today in the United States market, is about $50,000. Okay, if it is an electric car with all these additional, all these displays and everything you talk about, it could go up to 55,000 or more, edging towards 60,000. Now, why is that important? For two reasons. One is, this is strictly in the US context. Okay, 10 years back, pre-COVID, not even 10, less than 10 years back, in the pre-COVID years, 50% of the American cars were in the $30,000 range. Okay, today, as I said, it has gone up to 45, 50, that range. Why that is impacting? That is actually restricting the access, the power of this technology, restricting their access to a larger section of the consumers, not the first buyers, not the wealthy buyers, but I'm just saying the average buyers. So we can, and why does it matter? Because we see in the United States, at least, that the average ownership of the car is going up and up. Now it's about 12 and a half years. Next year, I'm sure the next survey will find it 13 years. So all the OEMs need to figure out not only how do I make a smart and intelligent car, but also smart, intelligent, and affordable car. Okay. And the ownership, and that extends to not just the buying part of the car, but also the repairability of the car. And that was specifically a question that was asked to me. What are we going to do about repairability, with all the sensors and everything? Today, if my car breaks down or there's a simple collision, just to repair the sensors and recalibrate those sensors can be $5,000. Okay, just for a simple accident. That is not a sustainable situation. So we continuously have to focus on not just the technology that we are developing, but how can we make those technology help us build cheaper without sacrificing safety. I think that's not an easy deal, but that should be the goal of all our technology developers. I really feel very strongly about that.
I have an interesting statement here. So bringing out more smart cars, which are naturally more expensive, actually makes our streets less safe, because the people who are holding on to their older cars, which are less and less safe, actually become more and more. So in the end, if we don't follow up and get, as Partha says, into a price segment where we can actually address to the mainstream, then we have a problem, because the cars will stay on the street longer, and therefore actually the streets will get less safe rather than more safe.
Yeah. I want to kind of go back, if you have time, Fatih, to make sure we touch on the open source conversation that we had.
Yeah,
I don't want to miss that.
Yeah, I mean, there is also one question from Andrew here.
Andrew.
Andrew, is open source that is most important, or is it the collaboration that is starting to happen between OEMs and partners that really matters most?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I came from a very traditional car maker, and I know, when I say as an ex-employee of a traditional car maker, it's probably true for many other traditional car makers. Car industry traditionally was in love with everything proprietary, whichever Toyota way, Mercedes way, BMW way, Ford way, GM way, etc. Everybody had to do their things by themselves, which is fine. But in an era when traditional car makers are somewhat struggling to kind of transition to this era of software first product development, they need to make sure at some point that, hey, I can't do everything by myself, number one. And number two, I don't need to do everything by myself. So there are things where I can bring software that stays hidden from the consumers. We talked about the consumers, and that is not, those software are not required to differentiate my product. Okay, in the non-differentiating function of the car, I can use something that is open source, that developed by a collection, the society, the community at large. So I think that's the real purpose or power of open source software. Now, some of the discussions we had, there was this early perception that, open source means free. Yay. No, it's not free. It has a very, not necessarily complicated, but I would say elaborate licensing requirement. And that means every car company, every tier one, whoever is using or developing them, they need to be really part of that. But they need to be aware of those aspects of licensing, of their own IP protection, etc. And that's something I think still evolving in the industry. So there is a lot of socialization and education of why open source is important, and it's not for everything, it's only for foundational software. Okay?
Absolutely. And the thought on that, I mean, if I ask Volkswagen to write the driver for a certain component in the car, that's not the intellectual property, because if I ask General Motors, they will write one-on-one the same thing, right? So that's not differentiating software. Sure, the front end, the user interface, and so on, that's a different topic. But if you write the same piece of software anyway, you cannot really consider that intellectual property. I wanted to just answer Andrew's question. So actually, the open source community starts to become a partner. So it's actually kind of both. So the open source community, including contribution and consumption of that, starts to become more and more involved as a partner, and is not something that is outside. It is actually, a lot of those open source communities are backed by tier ones and OEMs, and it is it's just a new player in the game, which or kind of like a new gang out of the existing players, if you will.
Yeah, right. And open source software is not the silver bullet. It's one enabler in the entire process. So that needs to be kept in mind. Nobody is saying, oh, we do open, everything is open source. No. There is a place for open source. There is a place for your own proprietary, whatever, secret sauce you want to develop, and that can differentiate your brand, of course, right? But
yeah.
no, I was
Go
going to
ahead.
say there are many things that it's new to the industry. I'm learning. I learned something, but just by listening to the lawyers who are there talking about, the IP protection challenges, all these things you have to make sure you are implementing as you are adopting them, but also the governance of the specific software consortiums. Okay, the Eclipse SDV talked about it, that they have a multiple protocols for their governance. They call it like top down. When I really want to not delay my releases, I want to do that, but at the same time they also have a more of a community approach. So it's a mix between top down and community approach. But why that governance is critical, I think it's critical for the success of the open source foundation. In past, and I always heard it, I don't have first-hand experience, that a lot of consortium critics would say that, for get one release, like all the 50 members have to agree, and then it takes 4 years for just one release from that consortium. I'm not going to name which consortium I'm talking about. You know them, but that cannot happen here. So it has to be in a manner where we have a governance which is very fast and very quick, reactive, and it kind of enables these new changes, new softwares in the market much quicker than traditionally we have seen in consortiums.
I mean, this open source topic, what you brought, Partha, I see there's a couple of challenges which are not really thought about at the moment. I mean, you talked about license models. I mean, open source software has different license models. And if you build some software with that, you can have thousands of packages you use from open source, and these packages can have different license models, which can contradict actually. And if you're not, if you don't care so much about that, you can have also so-called legal bugs, not only hardware bugs, not software bugs, also legal bugs, because you have some software on your car which should not be like that, because the license model is not compatible. And for example, what would an OEM do if there is something on the market and it has a legal bug, so to say, I mean, how to deal with that? Or for example, a Chinese car, Chinese OEM produce some car, sell it to Europe, and probably it's not a problem in China, but it could be a problem in Europe, or in America. And how to deal with such complication? I'm not sure if there are already some people thinking about that at all. I mean,
it's definitely a huge challenge. Not only because of the stuff we have today, but also what happens tomorrow. Because if there's new regulations coming out tomorrow, and we've seen UNECE apply retroactive some of their stuff, so I don't have an answer. And as I suggest we have a separate episode about this topic, and we know a couple of people we should invite for that. But in general, it is about governance and about organization, not organizational, but organization. You have to organize your open source, you have to organize your licenses and so on. So and it's probably worthwhile to point that out. Open source in the car does not mean that random individuals download stuff from GitHub and put that into their code, right? This is important to underline here. It is actually an organized way of open source usage.
Yes.
There is one question which is quite interesting, which came. How do we ensure there are globally accepted standards when it comes to SDV related aspects of a vehicle development?
Yeah.
I think
Good friend.
because I think different continents have different regulations. Europe has very strict regulations on safety, security. I don't know US how US is, but Asia probably has different. Yeah, this is a very valid question actually from.
And thank you, Srini. Srini is a good friend of mine, so I'm glad to see you
Really?
here.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. I think the question is valid that when we develop open source protocols, frameworks, it has to be something that can be globally adopted, not just in one market versus another. Okay, and this is something also came up in our conversation during the Eclipse SDV panel or presentation. And one of the thing is recently, for example, few months back, and Fatih, you know more about it than me. There was an MOU signed in Europe between, I think there were 12 signatories, OEMs as well as tier ones, as well as software companies and others, for adoption of Eclipse SDV software. I don't remember exact details, and that is great. I think that is great that the ecosystem is coming together, but that's only in the European market. So the question was that alone as a single step or only step is not going to advance the cause of open source and or address the specific issue that Srini is talking about. I think it has to be done through across all the markets. There has to be equal stakeholders across market. Europe, of course, US, and potentially Japan, Korea, all those markets, and China. Yes. So I think there is some work to be done. And I think that was acknowledged that yes, there is some work to be done. We are only in the early phase, but I think we need to keep in mind that if you want to standardize, if you want to really build a specific protocol around structure, around so open source software adoption, that culture, specifically the culture, it has to be across market. It has to be cross market. It cannot be just developed in one market and everybody say, oh, you know what, in US we are doing fine. Myself, we are doing fine in US. No, it has to be cross market.
But how do you deal actually? Okay, this is fine, I think. But how do you deal, for example, if a certain country says, okay, we will not import any cars which contains software from a certain country, like US and China? I mean, US, I think, was telling that a car with the Chinese code will never enter the market somehow.
Yeah.
I read this somewhere in the news also. How do you want to deal with that? I mean, what again?
Sorry, there's no Chinese cars in the US. But of course, you're
Chinese
talking about
code.
Chinese code.
No, it's a valid question. What you are talking about is absolutely valid, because we can see a lot more software is becoming a lot more of a trade issue between countries, between markets. And I think just like we have some level of, let's say, when you're importing components, physical components, we have some level of certification. So I think it may be, and I'm not an expert to kind of give you any specific direction, but certainly when Bosch is using a software, they have to have some sort of a third-party certification to say that this is good to be used in an American. That might be naive. It cannot work. But I'm saying that there are some discussions to be had. I'm not trying to be naive and say, this can be done. No, the challenges are significant. But if we want to adopt standard or rather open source software in the car industry, we cannot just do it in one small market and then the power will not be unleashed.
But how do you deal actually then? Open source projects have usually thousands of contributors, and this could be contributors could be also from China. If, for example, US says no car with Chinese code will enter US market, then you have to ensure actually that all open source projects
how do you do that? I mean,
exactly, this is my point. I mean, this is exactly my point.
This is just a bloated political statement. We are no Chinese code in here. How do you see it? Because it's written in Mandarin. This is bullshit. So, no, of course. I mean, open source, and you have to contribute. That can be anywhere. And
exactly.
What are you looking for? Are you looking for the nationality or for the geolocation or
Yes,
so
yes.
So I'd like to take a stand against Partha. I actually think the time of the world car is over. Honda Civic, Toyota Corolla, forget about it. I think there is no more world cars from here on forward when you look at software. I think there is 3 regions, and we will have to develop 3 different software stacks for those 3 regions because the legislative is different. And we will actually, and going back to the open source, because Srini's question was more for the SDV in general, not by the not for the software only. But I think it is important for all this software that we figure out a way to understand all that software. And this is where our AI tools will come back. And as a matter of fact, we at iPros are working on an idea in that direction, because it is millions and gazillions lines of code. AI can actually go through that. Humans cannot. So we have to figure out ways actually to get a seal of trust on open source. And that's a problem for the future to solve.
But this,
let me just clarify, why are we talking about open source, and why are you talking about some sort of cross market, compatibility? And I think here is the thing: it's not necessarily about specific code, but it's like, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I want to say, this is foundational. Everybody does this. If it is a screw, the screw is a screw, whether it's in inches or millimeters or whatever, a screw built in China is same as, even though there are differences, but I don't have to reinvent how to do that. Right. So the question is, even if there are, established protocols, and every market or every supplier can do their own things, there is some power to say that we are not doing it differently. We know how to do that. It's done exactly same, whether it's done in X market versus Y market. I think that's where, we somehow have to kind of at some point say, we can't reinvent the wheel for every little new software everywhere. We have to figure out something where we are able to reuse maybe a standardized software, or not necessarily standardized software, but a software with very basic standardized approach to build it. And
I totally agree with that. I just wanted to take the opportunity for that joke. So your screw will not screw you, but your software will. So, but
unless you somehow find out a way to deal them very
no, but the point is we have to define ways to, look into the software and actually, I wouldn't say urgently certify, but at least understand it. And this is what, there's companies working on that. A lot of companies working on that, startup companies and so on. So at one point, if and when we can say, okay, this open source is actually harmless, quote unquote, ran it through, we ran it through a bunch of checks and so on. That might be a way in the right direction.
Yeah, and I see a question.
Srini says here. But I think having an organization on, a central organization, I'm not really sure if this would work at all. Having some validation or certification for, certifying codes, I'm not really sure if this would work at all.
I think it will.
The regulation is too hard. It's
but
diverse.
Look, you use Misra, for example, on C code. Everybody has to adhere to it. Some, like a lot of people, users and smart people, put together a lot of rule sets. It is a possibility. You said rules for code and for interactions in your code, and you will have to spend a lot of time actually run your code through that. Maybe with every build, or maybe with every release, something.
Yeah. I
really
agree
believe
that
this is going to happen.
Yeah, I would agree to that, because if somebody says, my code is ASIL D certified, I think there has to be some sort of stamp of approval, by a third party or somebody, so that when I'm believing, you are coming to me saying that, hey, I have, this certification as a ASIL D by whoever, TUV in Europe, or
UL.
Tuxedo, I think. Yeah, whoever are those, third party certification bodies, or SAE or ISO, whatever that be. I think if that is there, it gives me an avenue to adopt something faster. Otherwise, if you are a supplier that I don't know about, you come and bring something to me, it becomes this whole self-certification. All those things become a lot more complicated. And I personally do not believe in self-certification. I think self-certification is a smokescreen. And I think I can self-certify anything, anywhere. It does not matter. The certification only matters when it's by at least a relatively independent third party, okay, who can do, at least on paper, more objective evaluation. So I think there is a role, and it has to be figured out how, because today all these organizations I mentioned, Tuxedo and is it Tuxedo?
Exeter.
I don't know. Yes, and TUV or TUV or
yeah.
SA, they do a lot of certification, but many of them are kind of rooted in the mechanical history of car industry.
For sure.
But I think we need to kind of transition, kind of make that happen in the software side of the equation. And I think that will make a lot of things a lot simpler. But that's a work that has not been done and needs to be done. And all these organizations, including, I think, organizations which are involved in open source, they need to be part of that.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, I don't want to interrupt. Actually, the discussion is really nice, but time is over. We should definitely continue this discussion in one of the next episodes, I think. Thank you for joining, Partha. Florian, thanks for the questions to the audience.
Always.
And let's see in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.